Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I have a book wrap-up, a reading wrap-up, book wrap-up. Who says that? It's a reading wrap-up. I'm gonna wrap up some books I read in August and some books I read in September, so it's kind of a 2-month wrap-up. These are not all of the books I read these 2 months because I've done separate videos for some of those. I've read some young adult hard-hitting contemporaries. The video about those is up on my channel already. And then I have some non-fiction books I also did a separate wrap-up for, which is gonna be up I think by the time I'm posting this video. So these are the books I'm going to talk about today, are the books that I read apart from those. So I have a total of 9 books here, and let's start with the very first one I read, which was at the very beginning of August, which feels like a lifetime ago. But it is a Kazuo Ishiguro book. I think that this year I'm gonna finish reading most of his works, his novels at least. I have read Never Let Me Go last year and The Remains of the Day this year. So after I finished the Remains of the Day, I went to the library and I picked up The Buried Giant by him. So this book is set in a post-Arthurian world in England where the Saxons and the Britons live together, and there's like a strenuous peace between them, and they can live in this peace because there's this mist on this land which makes people forget. And the question is whether this mist is a good mist. Is it good to forget, or is this mist something you have to find the root of and just make it disappear because forgetting is a bad thing? So our 2 main protagonists is an older couple, and I guess I fell in love with them from the beginning. They're just the way they speak to each other, the way they care for each other, the way they really take care of each other and are so attentive of each other is just so beautiful, but also so heartbreaking because they go on this long journey because at some point they discover that they have forgotten that they have a son who lives in this neighboring village and they have to go to visit him. So they go on this kind of epic fantasy quest, you would say, where they meet different people, they have different adventures, and their own quest for memory is kind of intermixed with this land's collective memory loss as well. And the center of this is it good to remember? Because you know that you will remember some negatives. You know that there are some things which are maybe better to be forgotten, or not forgotten, but maybe not spoken of anymore. The message of this is that even though you can go through a lifetime with someone, be with someone in this very close way, at the end there are things that you have to do by yourself. There are just some bridges you cannot cross with someone else. I gave this like 4 stars, 4.5. Then I read The Tull by Neal Shusterman, and this is the 3rd book in the arc of the Scythe series. Overall, this is not a fantasy series I really loved that much, despite this being a really popular one. So in this world, we conquered death, so no one dies. So there is an organization called the Scythedom, where scythes are appointed to glean. They wear these long robes, and they can go and decide who are they gonna kill, how many people, how. And some do it more mercifully, randomly, and others start doing it really like in an evil way, the way they're not supposed to. It's kind of interesting. And then we follow 2 apprentices to being scythes in the very first book. And there's this benevolent AI who take care of the whole world called the Thunderhead. He's kind of controlling the world and making sure everyone is okay, and then if people have accidents then they get revived pretty fast. So overall, I think this is quite a fast-paced series with a lot of political intrigue, some really like typical fantasy characters. But what is appealing about this is the unique setting and the premise. There were some things I didn't like about it because they were just too stereotypical. But overall, it is a fun series. I think I was just really bummed by how the first and the second, this book made these two Scythe apprentices fall in love with each other, and there was no need to be romance in this. There was absolutely no chemistry between them. There was also some pacing issues, I would say, but overall, yes, it's a pretty decent series, I think, and I would pick up other books and series by Neal Shusterman in the future. Then I have listened to Afropean Notes from Black Europe by Johny. I've picked this book up when I heard about it on BookTube, and I feel that there should be more books like this in Europe, because we read about books about racism, books about the Black experience, and we read about these in connection to the US and what's happening there and their history. And there are a lot of great books out there, a lot of great non-fiction, a lot of great novels, historical fiction, whatever. You want it, you can find it. But there's not a lot on the subject in an European setting. So the author here, he's a journalist from the UK. He goes to different cities in Europe where he to discover how the Black population lives in those cities. There was a lot of information packed in this, especially because if these were the backgrounds and the historical background of those countries, of those cities, initiatives of the Black communities to better their lives, of how they maybe live in like slums and the bad part of town and why is it so. It explores the colonialist past of some of these countries. Overall, I think this is a good book to get acquainted with this setting and with these countries and with being Black in Europe. And it kind of also refers to a lot of other work by a lot of other authors in the European authors on this subject. I really appreciated this, and there's definitely not enough talk about race and about the Black communities in Europe. And I think especially with what's happening currently in the US, there has been more talk of being Black in Europe as well, and the racism and the colonialist past. So I think reading this book right now it's really current, and I would recommend it to everyone. I think I gave this like 4 stars, and I will definitely read this again in physical form. The next book I read is Severance by Ling Ma. And funny enough, this is another one where there's a virus, a pandemic, which kills the population. Just like Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11, which I went into again not knowing what it was about. And I guess, in 2020, this is just something that hits you on a completely different way than normally. So in this world, we follow this young girl who lives in Manhattan. She lives in New York, and she's so devoted to routine. Just her life is just like a hamster wheel. She, like it feels sometimes we all are. We'll get up, have breakfast, go to work, come home, sleep, and then do the same thing over and over again. And when this deadly virus from China makes people into zombies in this, it's a virus and it affects slowly everyone, most of the population, I think 99.9% I would say. And she's the only one who doesn't get the virus. But despite everyone being sick and everything like stops working as people get sicker and sicker and more people get the virus, she still goes to work until she can, because there's no one else there. So it is about, I think this is a great commentary on modern life, just work life in general and how it takes over ourselves. Because in this world when you get the virus, it turns you into kind of a zombie. And the zombies forget to eat and sleep, you know, but what they do remember is the routine. And they do their routine over and over again until I guess they just disintegrate. It's funny because there's a scene where our main character, goes through Manhattan, and everywhere everything is just plundered and it's empty. It's very eerie, you know. And then there's this nice shop where everything is like in order and spotless. And then you see that there's a woman there whose face is falling off and whatever, but she's still folding her clothes and doing her stuff around the shop and keeping everything in pristine order. And it just makes you think, you know. So it's a kind of a weird book to read, and it has kind of an open ending, which I'm really not used to. I don't read a lot of books with open endings, but it kind of unsettled me a little bit. But overall, I think it is a great book, and I understand its appeal. It's not a typical dystopian book. I think it's more like a literary fiction, and it's basically a commentary on modern life and our routine and how important that routine is and how a slave to routine we are. So I think I gave it like 3-4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it if you haven't read it before. Next, I read The Good People by Hannah Kent. I've been meaning to read this book ever since I read The Burial Rites by her. That is a book I absolutely loved, and I think it's one of my favorite books of all time. And I've been meaning to read this book ever since, and now I finally did it. And even though this wasn't as good as The Burial Rites, in my opinion, I still loved it in many ways. I think Hannah Kent is great at writing historical fiction, at creating these really moody atmospheres and writing about people in more or less an isolated setting where community plays such an important role and influences the individual, and it's just the dynamics of people living in these really hidden rural areas really come forward in her books. She's great at starting her books in some maybe true fact and then taking it from there. For example, in Burial Rites, she wrote about the last woman being executed in Iceland. This one is set in 1825 in Ireland, and it is set in a very, very small village where people are still very much ignorant. They are so superstitious. They still believe in the fairies. The good people are the fairies. And their lives are kind of revolve around these superstitions, and they influence them to great degrees. They influence them in ways that are catastrophic. I mean, when I think about what's happening towards the end of this book, it's just unbelievable. I don't want to tell you much about it because I think you should go, if you want to read it, you should go and experience it yourself. But it's absolutely heartbreaking. So in this book, we follow a widow who has to take care of her grandson. Her grandson is sick. She doesn't know what's wrong with him. She thinks that the grandson is a changeling, and she's hiding this child. She's ashamed of him. And basically the whole community, the whole valley thinks that whatever misfortune happens to them, it's because they have a changeling in their midst. And this book is about this widow, her servant, a young girl who, despite being ignorant, is not ignorant in the same way as our widow is. And then we follow a third woman who is the medicine woman of this village, and they try to help this child. It is absolutely heartbreaking because you kind of know that this is gonna end really, really badly. But also you kind of want to see what's gonna happen because it's compelling. At the same time, I do believe that this is a bit slow paced, and it's more of an exploration of this community and how people who are so ignorant can really damage each other and can really prey on the weak. So overall, I did not absolutely love this book. It made me so furious at the end. But I've kind of seen that this is where it's going to. I'm happy I read this one, but it just unsettled me. It really did. So I think I gave it like 3 or 4 stars. The next one I read is really a chunkster. It's over 600 pages. It's The Iron Flower by Laurie Forest. This is book 2 in the Black Witch Chronicles. In this world, we follow Ellerin, who is the granddaughter of the Great Black Witch, who is kind of seen as the savior of her people. These people are witches, and most of them have some sort of powers. Ellerin, unfortunately, despite being the spitting image of her grandmother, doesn't have any powers. So she goes to this university to study to become an apothecary. I really loved the setting. I loved our main character, her development, and overall I really enjoyed the friendships and the political intrigue. I loved everything about it. I think it's one of my favorite young adult fantasies of all time. I was having high hopes there for this one as well, and it kind of disappointed me because it was too long for what it did, and it didn't really forward the plot that much more compared to what the first book did. Basically where the first book left off, I kind of knew where this book was heading, and in this one we're still heading that way, so we're still not there. But that road that led us there was just not that interesting, not that compelling. There were some peaks in action here and there, but overall this did not do so much. I was kind of disappointed. I was expecting much more development, both character and plot. It didn't really happen. I'm definitely interested in seeing where this series ends with the 3rd book. The next book I read was A Room with a View by Forster. I really have a rocky past with this book because I've tried to read it several times. I also tried to listen to it and just could not get into it. So when I picked this up now, I was like, it's gonna happen no matter what, I'm gonna finish it. And I kind of forced myself to finish it, and it took me some time because of that, because despite this being short, it was not a fast read for me. I have read this year A Passage to India, and I think I kind of feel the same way about that as well. There's just some things about Forster and his writing that really goes over my head, and I don't know, it may be because English is not my first language. I just feel that I'm missing some of the subtleties. But now after I finished it and look back and think about it, I cannot but think how brilliant this is and how brilliantly it depicts England in the Edwardian time and its people, and how it depicts being British while traveling abroad, and how it pokes fun of their ways and their rigidity, and how steeped and really entrenched in class and social status they are. He did kind of the similar thing in A Passage to India, but I think in The Passage to India, the difference between the expat Brits living in India and the Indians came out with more of a contrast, because we kind of got to know both groups. In A Room with a View, we kind of only see the story from the British perspective, because we don't get to know any Italians. So in this first part of this book, we follow a set of characters who are living together at this hotel pension in Italy, because they are traveling to Italy. And it is mostly about their interactions and how they see each other and how they look down upon some of the people living there because of their rough ways. So we follow this young girl mainly. She's taken to Italy by her aunt as her chaperone, and then her ways and her upbringing is kind of put forward and questioned, and she kind of gets faced with the rigidity of her upbringing and of her social circle, because she meets people who are so different and looked down upon because of their difference. Overall, this book might not exactly be the perfect book for me, but I appreciate for what it is and what it does, and how it looks at society and how it pokes fun at society. And I think that's what makes E.M. Forster such a great writer. And then we come to the next Kazuo Ishiguro I read, and this is his debut, A Pale View of Hills. This was quite a short one, under 200 pages, and I listened to this, and the audiobook was great. I really loved the narrator. So in this one, we follow two timelines. We follow the present, where we follow Etsuko, who is mourning the death of her daughter who committed suicide. She is living in England, but she is from Japan. She has an older daughter who comes to visit her, and they spend some days together. But the drive of the story, and I think the bulk of the story, is happening in the past, where Etsuko remembers her life and the last period, I guess, of her time living in Nagasaki just after the Second World War. We follow her there where she was pregnant and living with her husband, where her father-in-law came to visit. And during this time, she also befriended a neighbor called Sachiko, and Sachiko had a daughter. Sachiko and the way she's raising her daughter is really questionable, and Etsuko does not agree with that at all. And then at the same time, we follow her life and how her marriage is, and there's just really hints at how this marriage actually is, and how the presence of the father-in-law really sets things on edge. But everything is just so subtle, because everyone is just so polite with each other, and the way they talk to each other is just so stilted and just overly polite that you don't feel that there's actual emotion in there. And it shows the differences between these generations, and how the younger generation kind of wants to move away from their past, because what happened in the past, of course, the Second World War and the atomic bomb and what led to that. And it just subtly hints at the changes in the Japanese society. And at the same time, you also follow these two women and their friendship, and how Etsuko sees her friend dealing with her daughter, and how she raises her daughter, and the trauma that happened to these people. It's not really there on page, but you can really read it through the sentences between the lines, I guess. I was surprised by the ending. I saw some of it coming, but not all of it. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful book. I gave it 5 stars, and I highly, highly recommend it. I mean, it's amazing. It's his debut, and it is absolutely amazing. I really, really loved it. And now we're finally, this video is gonna be so long. I'm gonna spend so much time editing it. Oh my God. Can you tell I'm not looking forward to that? Anyway, the last book, I've actually not finished this yet. Technically, I have like 40 pages left, but I might as well finish. I might as well wrap it up here, because I don't think my opinion of this book is gonna change the last 40 pages. How Long Till Black Future Month is a collection of short stories N.K. Jemisin wrote. And there's like all kind of stories, like in every short story collection. There's some amazing ones I really like. There's some other ones I was like, oh, they're okay. What I do agree is that on all of these, they're just so unique, all of them, and they're so different. If she would develop all of these short stories into books, I would read them all. I think she's amazing at writing really unique characters, and really, really unique and different fantasy science fiction worlds. And if you want to read something different than the typical what we know fantasy books, fantasy worlds, like think Game of Thrones, think Brandon Sanderson, think Lord of the Rings, then you should definitely give N.K. Jemisin a go, because I think she's amazing. I mean, the Broken Earth trilogy is not an easy read, but once you get into it, you won't be able to put it down. Overall, I think this is a 3-star short story collection for me. There's just utopian world, there's just fantasy worlds, there's just fantasy historical fiction, there's full science fiction, there's fantasy, there's just a whole blend of science fiction and fantasy in this. And there's just some of them who are really like almost set in the real world with like hints of fantasy, and others are just like full on. So there's like a wide array of different stories in here. And I love how she can capture that story and that world in such a short page number, you know. So overall, if you haven't picked up anything by N.K. Jemisin yet and you love fantasy, you have to. These are all the books I wanted to talk about. I can't believe I managed it. I finished. It took me, I don't want to think about how long it took me, because these wrap-ups always take me such a long time. I don't know why I feel that I need to tell you each and every thought I have about these books, but I do. So I appreciate you watching this to the end if you did. Let me know what is the best book you've read in the past month and why. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.